And I said earlier in the day when I was introducing how we work with our network partners to find great presenters. And so we have another great presenter coming up next. Dan Archer is a founder of Empathetic Media and also a fellow at the Tao Center for Digital Journalism at Columbia University's Journalism School. Dan was a presenter at the Frank Gathering at Florida earlier this spring, and he's going to tell you, he's a unique, I think, combination of practitioner, scholar, sort of a journalist, but also a tinkerer, and a great artist. Come up and prove me wrong, if you will.
Thanks very much for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Vince and Jessica, for the invitation. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the company that I founded, Empathetic Media, the work that we've done, but also how we are examining, tinkering, and problematizing some of the blanket definitions that we've seen with empathy, which seems to be, as I'm sure you're all aware, the watchword and almost synonymous with virtual reality and these sort of forms of immersive media. So Empathetic Media, well, I should start by saying this is a screen grab from a project we're currently under construction. It's based around a 50-year reboot, if you will, of Gordon Parks's A Harlem Family, published in Life magazine. And we're basically focusing on leveraging the tools, the cutting-edge tools now, to repurpose some of those original photographs, which documented life inside Harlem for a struggling family on the poverty line, and how really we can juxtapose that with the current conditions that are happening today using virtual reality. And what you can see there is a combination of 3D scans and environmental scans. So in terms of our mission, we're based out of Brooklyn. One of the main focuses is, as I said, leveraging this cutting-edge technology to foster a greater connection between audiences and their stories. And we fundamentally believe that it's by, everyone talks about, being in another's shoes. Although that can be mistakenly seen as sort of a prosaic definition, we do believe that there is a huge power to that first-person perspective when you're experiencing narrative. Combining a range of disparate forms of media and juxtaposing contradictory accounts sometimes inside an open space, almost like a sandbox free world, where the users have agency to make their own decisions within a story. So it's sort of skirting that fine line between user agency and a curated narratorial experience. In terms of some of the research that we're looking, because we obviously want to put our money where our mouth is, I've been working as a Tao Fellow since earlier this year to really focus on a project that compares and contrasts different forms of media, virtual reality and text predominantly, within a controlled environment to see if there is anything to that. So I'm going to talk about some of the findings that we've found so far. And essentially I'm going to structure my talk, I'm going to frame it around these 3 points. So Chris Milk kicked off a lot of the interest a couple of years ago now, which is seen as sort of millennia in the VR scheme of things, by referring to VR as an empathy machine. And I recently read, it was a Harmony Institute quote that said, saying VR was an empathy machine is saying like a pen is an art machine. So obviously there's this huge disparate range of experiences and narrative experiences that can be produced within it. It doesn't itself constitute, putting the headset on means that you will necessarily be in another person's shoes. So I'm going to talk about some of the concomitant challenges that we found there. In terms of delivery, you've already seen there's a headset backstage. Some of the challenges, out of interest, how many of you, for example, have done an HTC Vive experience? Okay, great. And how many of you have done Cardboard? Okay, that's heartening. It's probably the highest I found at a conference. So, we're looking at different ways. We're trying to democratize what is essentially still quite a walled garden when it comes to a medium, particularly when it comes to sharing the experiences that we've been recording. I think there's all too often the risk that people can take this incredible footage made on very expensive rigs and display it for a particular audience, but then find it very hard to loop back in the communities whose stories they're actually sharing. How can they contribute back to that discussion? And then last but not least, where does impact fit into this? So we have factored in a longitudinal aspect to our study. We've just have to wait until I tell you what's happened. So in terms of framing the findings, and again, I should frame this by saying I am no cognitive scientist. We have found, it has helped me to form our findings into these three sort of casual breakdowns of quote-unquote empathy in terms of audience response and where we want to find that sweet spot in terms of impact. So recently actually I was asked, I'm also an Images of Voices of Hope fellow. I was recently asked, why do you not call your company sympathetic media as opposed to empathetic media? And so one of the reasons, I think, is because it's tied up, to me at least, that idea of sympathy is tied up in the inherent power structures that we find when we're, again, reporting on stories, and particularly in the scheme of restorative narrative, like what are we restoring and who are we doing the restoring for? And are we coming to this as an equal playing field, or is there a, like I say, an inherent sort of, maybe perhaps unwilling, but condescension in that framework. So looking, as you can see on the left here, in terms of empathy, there's obviously that main division between subject and object where you retain that sense of self and you see an other and you're able to, on the surface, anticipate what the conditions of their experience must be like. Going to the right, you can get that sense of empathy in the sense of taking on another person's experience, but at the same time maintaining that distance and that sense of selfhood. We have found that in terms of convergence, it's actually, you want to find a sweet spot where you can operationalize that aspect. So you want to give users a sense of being able to take a next step, not feeling so immersed, as you can see on the far right-hand side, where, in fact, as a lot of practitioners have been doing, if you put someone in the heart of a traumatic experience without necessarily context or a lot of the, the forewarning, it can actually have the opposite effect, whereby it distances them and forces what's called this feeling of mortal salience, where they actually feel under sort of, they feel that same pressure and threat and fear response, which is obviously antithetical to what you're actually going after. So this is a screenshot from one of the pieces that we're basing our study on. It's called Seeking Home by Riot, who I'm sure you're familiar with, a VR agency recently bought by the Huffington Post. And they focus on 360 video. I mean, it's a separate conversation, obviously. A lot of people see no difference between virtual reality and 360 video. The way we see it, virtual reality is more of a description of that computer-generated experience, of which we've done some work, and which many believe leads to heightened interactions and immersion, because there's that physical aspect of interacting with an environment, as opposed to 360 video, which some people see as more passive. But that being said, it's a lot easier in terms of access to access this content. It's available through YouTube and Facebook, for example. So what you're seeing here is one of the protagonists in Seeking Home. And effectively what we did at Columbia, there'll be 2 or 3 phases to the study. In the first phase, we have taken different VR experiences, 3 different VR experiences, and effectively transcribed them into text, as well as written an immersive, quote-unquote, textual version of the piece. After a lot of user feedback suggested that, just obviously describing the stories as you can see them does no justice to some of the incredible reporting that's been done. So we are doing that, and then we're having a VR experience through the Samsung Gear VR, as well as a non-immersive VR experience. So users will have a desktop version of the experience, a mobile immersive version, and the 2 texts that I mentioned. And effectively what we're going to be doing is we'll do self-reported surveys in terms of the efficacy and a background check before they begin, as well as, as I mentioned, a longitudinal follow-up immediately after, a week after, and a month after, with a series of prompts to gauge the impact, prompting them to either contribute, to volunteer, or merely just sign up to a newsletter. So we're in the piloting stage at the moment, but we'll have results out by the fall, and there'll be a white paper through the Tau Center. So feel free to contact me if you want to be looped in. In terms of some of the biases that I talk about, and particularly some of the challenges when it comes to strapping on a headset and immediately assuming that you're someone else, these are just some of the myriad different concerns and questions that we've been poking at in terms of our approach to work and what does and doesn't work. So you can see, it's interesting, for example, we've done a canvas and sort of a benchmark of a lot of the content that's out there. We found that a lot of it politically skews quite liberally. So you're already leaving out a huge subsection of audiences. I think it's that's due in a lot of ways to the nature of the content creators that are producing a lot of these experiences. But you can see, in the interest of time, I'm going to speed up, but physical aspects also have a great impact, where you're relatively positioned in terms of the camera height, as well as interpersonal space, like where we're moving in terms of the environment and how much of that we can see. So in terms of some of our work, these are just some of the partners that we've worked with. You can see we've also done 360 work. And I'll talk about some of the examples, in fact, right now. So the first piece that we did, which I think caught Jessica and Vince's eye, was Ferguson Firsthand. It was a CG-created experience of the Canfield Green Apartments complex in Ferguson, Missouri, where Michael Brown was shot in 2014. And what we wanted to do was position different audio recordings of the grand jury testimonies inside the physical space, so that users donning the headset could then move through and decide which beacon, which piece of audio they wanted to hear, and what the vantage point of it looked like. So in that sense, we wanted to give them the agency to be able to make sense of what they thought happened that day, rather than a curated experience. And hopefully, fingers crossed, this might load and I can show you a screen demo.
You have just arrived
there we
at
go.
the Canfield
Thank God
Green
for that.
Apartments
So,
complex in Ferguson, Missouri, soon after Michael Brown was fatally shot by police officer Darren Wilson. Your goal is to explore the environment by walking into 3 different kinds of beacons. Colored beacons will display comics of the eyewitness testimonies that were broadcast by the media immediately after the shooting. White beacons will display photos of the evidence gathered by forensic investigators, and black beacons will play audio of the eyewitness statements made during the grand jury trial.
So as a caveat, I should mention that was a 3D video, the 360 video that we baked out of the CG experience. That wasn't the experience itself, but it gives you a sense of the different pieces of media that you can put inside the scene. Rifling through very, very quickly, I also wanted to show you some 360 work that we've done. So this is an equirectangular. It's obviously not using YouTube's 360 player because we know about the Wi-Fi here. So this is a piece on the homeless in New York, where we...
She became a nurse out here.
Let him speak for himself.
I was working as a waiter and doing like certain jobs at night. And as time progressed, it just didn't work out. We broke up, so I tried to stay in Florida on my own. I had a studio.
So what we're doing here is playing with that idea of perspective, as you can obviously see, using the subject's audio and allowing users to effectively take his position. We've also done some 3D room scanning to give you a sense of fidelity. Some people level the charge that, it's too video game-like. So this is just a very quick video showing you what it looks like this is a 3D scanned room that you can then fully move around in. And this is screen footage that's recorded inside a Sony Gear VR headset, with, again, that focus on mobile to allow more people to access this beyond just the desktop. And last but not least, this is a screen grab from our latest piece. It's called The Peace Process, and it's focused on the 3 testimonies from a ex-paramilitary, a former FARC guerrilla, and a civilian in Colombia. Obviously, we're all aware of the sort of embryonic peace accord that was reached last week. This is part of a restorative justice program that's being rolled out, and effectively it allows users to share these different experiences. And I was getting at that point around VR delivery. What we're looking at is taking this back to Medellin in Spanish and starting sessions and co-creating spaces where inside a workshop environment, different sides, former enemies can begin a discussion around what their experiences are like, and leverage I guess in a way, the novelty, but also the power of this immersive storytelling to share stories. So I'll just wrap up by talking about some of the good and not so good points about VR. As you can see, it's suited to exploratory environments like that open world sandbox, but reversely, you want to make sure the world is not too open. So we've had a lot of experiences where you give agency or too much agency to users, and they can either become distracted or they can become afraid that they're missing out on the experience, that sort of sense of FOMO. So curation is still critical. In terms of leading experiences, audio is still 100% key. As it was with film and quote-unquote traditional cinema, I've seen a lot of 360 experiences that you strip the audio out and they actually lose a lot of their sense. But at the same time, you want to be careful about really overextending what you believe to be the power of this simultaneity in terms of medium. I've seen a lot of pieces where we're expected to follow disparate paths as we look around. And again, users aren't used to sort of working that hard. And so that can, again, problematize their understanding and their access into the piece. And then last but not least, I think it's important to allow people this access into environments and scenes that they might not normally have access to, but you can't count, you don't want to necessarily try and sum up 50 years of Colombian history, for example, inside a visceral 4 or 5 minute experience. So one of the challenges we found is how you can pair, almost using transmedia and different mediums with a VR experience to present a full package. So we use graphic novels, for example, as well as 360 video, as well as animation, couched inside a regular, quote unquote, text article to foster those experiences. So I hope that's been helpful. That was kind of a whistle-stop tour. Yeah, thank you very much. If you want any more information, thank you.
At the end of the day, we get the people who can talk really fast and like jam in the last 2 hours worth of stuff in 45 minutes. Thank you, Dan. I think some of you may have picked up on this. His Twitter handle is Arch Comics, and so among all of his other multifaceted experiences, the FX series, animated series Archer is also based on his life. No, it's not. Actually, it's not.